This video contains content that some might find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Do you remember the thrill of going down a water slide as a child? The fear that morphs into excitement as you approach the light at the bottom of the tube? Now imagine that moment when you're in the tube concealed in darkness, being endless. Realizing your screams of terror can just as easily be misinterpreted as screams of joy. The proper assignment of which will be paramount in tonight's story. I'm Ryan Bergara, and this is Are You Scared? Don't look at it.
I looked at it.
The Whirlwind. Despite the area being covered and offering some respite, the heat leaked into my clothes and I broke out in a sweat. It was one of the hottest days of summer by far. Unfortunately for me, that meant that Ocean Meadows was absolutely packed from open to close. My summer job as a lifeguard paid well, but sometimes dealing with the bratty kids and their annoying parents just was not worth the dough. What did make it worth it was Savannah Williamson, the coworker I had a crush on. Ocean Meadows owned 2 slides that stood side by side, and Savannah worked the one next to mine. My slide, known as the Whirlwind, was covered and steep. The other, which Savannah was assigned to, was a less intimidating open slide called the Gulf. Nothing particularly stood out during that morning. The park opened promptly at 9, and children of all shapes and sizes came barreling through the gates. Savannah and I were stationed at our respective slides. The job was easy. If the kid met the height requirement, we'd instruct them to lay down with their arms crossed and send them down the slide. Allison, the lifeguard stationed at the slide's exit, made sure the children swam out of the way to safety before another hyperactive child came barreling down. That day, I was halfway through my pretty uneventful shift. Savannah and I made small talk about our weekend plans. I invited her to see a movie with me that Saturday, and to my delight, she blushed and agreed. Yet another teenager went down the Whirlwind without a hitch. I watched him emerge with a giant splash, then motioned for the next girl in line to come up. A child, no more than 10, stood waiting for my signal. She came forward, positioned herself in the slide, and looked up at me. It's my first time doing this. I could see the fear in her eyes. I leaned forward. It's okay, it's a lot of fun. But it's dark and scary and there could be monsters. Nothing bad will happen. And if there were a monster in there, it would have already eaten everyone else up, I joked. Her face remained deadly serious. She stopped to look around her surroundings before whispering to me, not just any monster, the monster. I didn't quite know what she was getting at, but I placed a hand on her shoulder. It can't get you here. You promise? Her eyes looked trusting. Promise. I held out my pinky and she offered her own, intertwining it with mine. After I let go, she did too. Her body fell into the darkness of the Whirlwind. Then, silence. Not from those waiting in line. They all still buzzed with excitement. No shouts coming from the slide, from the girl. No anything. I looked down at the pool below, and it was crystal clear that the girl hadn't reached the bottom yet. Puzzled, I turned toward Savannah. Has she come out yet? I asked. Savannah's face filled with confusion, so I clarified. The girl. Have you seen her come out of my slide? Savannah shook her head, looking down at Allison, motioning for the next person in line to come forward. No. Why? She's not out yet. Dude, what's the holdup? A man in line grumbled. I've been waiting for 20 minutes. I ignored him. The girl still hadn't appeared at the bottom. I leaned down into the mouth of the slide and yelled, Hey kid, are you still going down? No answer. Kid? I called again. Nothing. I turned to Savannah. Will you watch my line? Don't let anyone come down. I'm going to ride down and see where she is." Savannah smiled and nodded. I positioned myself at the slide's entrance. Laying on my back, I pulled myself forward with my arms. Strangely, I began to hear eerie whispers coming from the people in line right before going down. I careened down the slide's precipitous length, my body being thrown left and right in the darkness. I did my best to keep my eyes peeled for the girl, but it was useless. Warm water enveloped the entirety of my body as I zipped to the bottom. I finally exited the slide and flew into the pool, creating a huge splash. I immediately locked eyes with Allison. "I was about to ask what was taking so long. Why haven't you sent a kid down in like 5 minutes?" she asked, clearly annoyed. "I did send one down," I answered, "like a 10-year-old girl, but she hasn't come out yet." "You're pulling my leg," Allison said. "I'm not. She hasn't come out, and that's why I tried to look for her. She's just gone." That got her attention. Fear and realization dawned over Allison's face as she looked at my forehead, and then at the slide behind me. "What?" I asked. "Are you bleeding?" I don't think so. Your hair and your face, there's blood." With a shaking hand, she pointed at the whirlwind. I whipped around. Gradually, the water began changing into a light pink color. Then, to my horror, a darker pink. The 2 slides were shut down immediately. Allison radioed our boss, and I raced to help cut the water source. Savannah helped everyone exit the stairs in a somewhat orderly fashion. Panic swept over Ocean Meadows. Allison, Savannah, our supervisor, and 2 other lifeguards joined us at the top of the slides, while an anxious crowd waited below. The once pink water had quickly transformed into a dark crimson. It became clear that the blood was streaming into the pool. The water became impossibly murky, making my stomach ache. "All right, listen up," our supervisor yelled. "According to Michael, a child went into this slide," she motioned, "and never came out. We've shut the water off and a team is working on draining the pool," she continued. "We've notified the police to help search for the child, but all of their officers are preoccupied. They said that they would send a patrol car over to investigate as soon as they can. Until then, we need to do everything we can to find this missing child." The supervisor paused, clicking her tongue to the roof of her mouth. "We're attempting to locate her parents right now." As if on cue, an ear-splitting scream of a woman echoed from the crowd below. She was frantically repeating a name, it sounded like, and her movements were frantic and jerky. I watched as a lifeguard rushed to her aid. A sinking feeling engulfed my entire body. The woman, unmistakably, was the girl's mother. At that very moment, my supervisor's walkie-talkie crackled to life. "The child's mother is here with me," the man on the other end said. "She says the girl's name is Lily." As my supervisor answered him, the other lifeguards set out to shut down Ocean Meadows' operations. I heard the blares of a siren coming closer and closer, all because of this girl, Lily. I was the last person to see her, I realized. My supervisor turned to us. "Now that it's dry, we need someone to search the slide to see if there's any sign of Lily there." Without a second thought, I shot up my hand. My supervisor nodded, then tossed me a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. Savannah squeezed my hand before I began my journey down, and I was off. I methodically inched my body down the slide, doing my best to slow myself when needed. I firmly pressed my palms against the sides of the slide for support. The flashlight beamed up ahead, but so far I saw nothing at all. Then I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. The unmistakable sound of liquid. I came to a complete stop, pulling the walkie-talkie from my belt. I pressed the button and radioed my supervisor. "I thought you said they turned off the water." A few seconds later, he responded. "They did." I loosened my palm's hold on the sides of the slide and slipped down further. Drip, drip, drip. It was steady. Drip, drip, drip. What the hell? It was getting louder. I rounded the next turn. Drip, drip, drip. It was closer. Drip, 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 drip. It came faster now. I carefully rounded the last corner before the slide ran into the pool. And then I saw her. There she was. Not on the slide. Somehow on the roof of it. I inched closer. Every part of her body was pinned to the top of the slide. If I moved any closer, I would be directly underneath her. What was left of her, anyway. I could immediately tell that no life remained in her limp body. Her big brown eyes, once filled with sparkle and nervousness from anticipation, were now completely devoid of life. Dull, bloodshot, bored. Her pale face was ghostly white. Her throat was slit, causing blood to dribble steadily down onto the slide. Bile immediately rose in my throat. I couldn't look away. Drip, drip, drip went her blood. But what shocked me most was the strange smile that curved on her lips. It was unnatural, unhuman. I inched forward, and I carefully reached out my hand, trying to figure out how her body was possibly sticking to the roof of the slide like that. As soon as my fingers grazed her forehead, a scream escaped her smiling lips, and she plummeted, face first, directly in front of me. I gasped. My supervisor's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie, but I didn't listen. I watched as Lily slid down the rest of the slide. I swear that before she rounded the final corner, I saw her pick up her head and smile up at me. Her cold, dead eyes remained lifeless as that devilish smile grew wider and wider. I heard the slap of her body as she hit the drained pool's hard cement. The horrified screams followed. I could not bring myself to move an inch. It felt like hours before I gathered the energy to move myself down the slide. After emerging bloodied and terrified, I saw Savannah at the pool's edge. She was crying, and for the first time, I realized that I was too. She wrapped her arms around me, frantically describing the state of the child. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I had just experienced. That would be the last time I spoke to her. Ocean Meadows closed down for the rest of the season, and the next summer, Ocean Meadows shut down for good. I never once told anyone what I saw, not the police who questioned me that day, nor my friends or family. I didn't want people to know that I felt completely responsible for what happened to Lily. I told her the monster she was petrified of couldn't hurt her. I lured her into the whirlwind, and that's where she died, alone and scared because of me. So, are you scared?